Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I believe the time has come for women to share their gifts, their voice, and their stories. I love seeing women spiritually and financially empowered, thriving in their life's work, and doing what they love every day. I've gathered a community of women living their dreams to tell us their stories and inspire us to step into more courage, self-love, and feminine leadership. If you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com. Now get cozy with a journal and a cup of tea. I hope you enjoy today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by our listeners who have subscribed at Patreon. Patreon is a way to financially contribute to the continued growth of the Rising Woman Leaders podcast. If you've received spiritual nourishment from these stories and this podcast, if you believe in our mission to share women's voices and be in devotion to the rising feminine, I invite you to pledge $1, $3, $5 an episode. Simply go to patreon.com/risingwomanleaders to sign up. I'm here today with Luna Love, who is a woman of devotion, a transformational leadership mentor, and host of the Ladies Who Lead podcast. And we are lucky to be here in person together. We've been spending some time together the last few weeks. It's been wonderful. And I'm so happy to have her here to talk about this death midwifery training that she just completed and to talk about the topic of conscious death and dying. Welcome, Luna.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you. And it's so lovely to be able to do this in person.
Yeah. So what was your inspiration to do this training that you just went to?
So I did a training over the last 6 months and with a woman named Olivia Barham in LA. And I had taken a course with another woman, Danny, who's in Prescott, Arizona, a year earlier. It was really about the reclaiming death as a part of our culture, as a part of something that we have done traditionally with our loved ones for a long time, and to really reclaim that because we've outsourced it. And so I had been, in my own way, initiated into death at a young age with family members. My mom passed away and was sick for a few years of my life when I was like 11, 12, and she passed away when I was 13. So I was around it and talked about it with her and knew that that was coming and knew that that was inevitable. And we had a lot of conversations, and then other loved ones. And my journey with it has been unfolding and really appreciative. So I would find dead animals a lot, and just knowing that these sacred things were like coming to me and coming into my path for a reason, and just honoring their soul's journey. And so it's been evolving. And then when I met this woman, I had already been really into Stephen Jenkinson's work and some meditations in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying. And it had been something that it just seems like such an integral part of life that I wanted to, that didn't seem like it had a lot of space in our lives, but it was such a big piece of it that I was confused as to why. And so listening to a lot of these teachers helped me kind of find my own relationship with being informed by death. And what I really want to do in my own work is really study and be with death as a way to learn how to live better. Mm-hmm. So when we die well, we can live well. When we avoid parts of this life, then we're not living a whole, full, complete life. So I did this training to have more certification and just deepen my knowledge and practice in the world of death midwifery or death doula. And there's so many different facets of it. And so I was really just inspired to learn more. And I think just being with people when they're dying is the best practice. Mm-hmm. and quite an honor. And so, yeah, I don't know where it will go, but I feel very opinionated and informed and excited to keep diving into it and to keep sharing, because I think the biggest part of this is having conversations, because it's something that we kind of sweep under the rug until it's actually in front of us. And so the more conversations that we can have when we're alive and well, the more prepared we are for that time.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we don't talk a lot about in our culture. It's kind of scary. It's like we think so much about youth and the young, and it can be kind of shocking, like when a grandparent dies or a close family member, because we haven't had that, it hasn't been ingrained in our culture to even talk about it.
Yeah. This woman, Danny, that I studied with, she talks to her kids. She's got 2 kids. She talks to them all the time about death. So if mommy and daddy both die, who do you want to live with? And they have this ongoing list, and they'll go to dinner at somebody's house and they're like, oh, we really like them. Let's bump them up on the list. So they just know that, like, it's a possibility. Like, when my mom was sick, that was something that we talked about, all the possibilities of, because she was a single mom, like who I could live with. And I was prepared for that in certain ways and not in other ways. And I think that the more we are aware that this is part of as soon as we're born, this is an initiation into death. Like when a child is born, and in certain cultures, when you're gifted your kind of christening gown, and that's probably not the right term in different cultures, but kind of like this birthing gown that you wear. In a lot of cultures, you're also gifted your shroud at the same time, so that what you will kind of honor your birth as and kind of be wrapped up in your death is acknowledged in the beginning, that this is going to happen, and it's something that you keep and have as kind of a reminder that it's always there, that this is inevitable. And I think that's so beautiful, and something that we don't even want to talk about, even with older people. Like my grandma's 83 and well, and anytime we talk, she's like, I'm not dying yet. And it's like, yeah, I know, but like, let's just talk about it, because eventually you will be, and so will I. And just having the conversations as much now, so that when we get to that time, we're prepared.
Yeah, and then we can make decisions from a conscious place, having our full awareness, because you never know what can happen. Being prepared in that way. Yeah. So you spoke a little before about how it has helped you inform your living. How has it helped you, like, inform the way you live, knowing and thinking about death?
I think it's all the things that encompass death, including loss and grief and kind of depression, or going like down into that kind of grave, even though we're alive, which those who have had kind of a dark night of the soul or an emotional experience of finding themselves may have experienced at some time. And so it's not just welcoming death, but kind of the full spectrum of things that we don't want to talk about in life. And I think loss is something that happens all the time. And we lose opportunities and things that we had hoped for, and partners and homes and jobs and houses and different things like that we lose. And I think acknowledging loss is a huge part of that death spectrum that is often forgotten, because we rely a lot on productivity for our value and sense of survival in this culture. And so without that kind of community support of like, you can just grieve this loss or this trauma and just be okay with it, and I got you covered. Like, I got your, like, I'll bring food over, and when your kid, when you need to bring your kids to somebody's house, like, I got it. And your needs are met, and it's not like, I don't have time for this because I have to go to work, and I can't take that much time off work because I lose my job, or whatever it is. And I think that kind of productivity mindset as a part of our survival, and it's so individually based, without that community really doesn't allow us to have the time to value the gifts of grief and loss and what they bring into our lives. And so I feel like we're a culture that kind of has an illiteracy around those things, and like just could become more fluent in the language of grief and loss, and death, in the ways that this happens all the time throughout our day and our lives, and in doing that would prepare us for the bigger losses of loved ones in our life. Mm-hmm. And so feeling the waves of grief, it's interesting because when I think of a spectrum of emotions, and if it was negative and positive, or like pleasant and unpleasant, I think most people would put grief on that kind of negative or unpleasant side. And I find it to be so neutral because it has weight. Everyone who's ever experienced grief that I've talked to describes it as waves. Grief comes in waves, and there are these highs where you think you're out of it, and then another wave comes. And I think that it's the grief itself that invites those highs and invites those lows, and in the middle of it is this neutral state. And how I've experienced grief, and just going back to your question of how it's allowed me to live more fully, is really grieving, like learning the language of grief and becoming intimate friends with it and letting it inform my life. And the biggest piece of what it informs me of is my own identity. And in grieving, I have allowed myself to grieve the parts of myself that were attached to the loss. So if I'm with a partner and I have this whole vision of our lives and we break up, I think oftentimes we think that we're grieving that other person. But what I've come to find for myself is that I'm really grieving the life that I thought I would have, the woman as that person's partner, the woman with this title as this job, or the woman who lived in this home, the daughter, the titles that we give ourselves and the identities that we take on that are all related to things that are external that can be lost or can die. And when we can, so grief for me invites, who am I without this thing? And it really invites a deeper knowing of myself. And it grieves the parts of myself that I've created that are really not who I am, or identified with that are not really who I am. And so for me, that's like the biggest benefit of it. And I also think it's a level of personal responsibility. So a lot of my work, like yours, is around leadership. And so we're responsible for our bodies now, and what we do and how that affects people around us and how that affects the environment. And so the same in death, how we are responsible and how we embody qualities of leadership and take initiative to be aware of our impact is equally relevant, almost if not more, in death, because we're not capable. Our senses are going, our hearing is going, our mobility is going, unless it's like an accident that kind of happens out of nowhere. A lot of times there's a sickness or an age development that just slowly starts to take those things away. So the more that we're prepared in life to choose the things around our death that we can be responsible for, it takes, our loved ones are not left with that responsibility. Yeah. Or like getting into conflict with one another because children have different desires for mom. And if they all talked about it in a conscious way when mom was living and heard mom's wishes and wrote it down and had, different pieces of it already laid out, we could just allow so much more ease so that we can really grieve together rather than be shocked at all the decisions that we have to make and are left with. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little more just about your personal story when you were 13 and your mom passed. Did you have any resources for grief at that time? What was that like? And also, I'm curious just who you did choose to live with and what that transition was like for you.
Yeah. I talked a lot about this kinds of things with my mom, and I was so not prepared. And I wasn't prepared because she wasn't prepared, and my family on an emotional level, to share all the feelings. It's like, yeah, we wanted to, when she was alive, we wanted to just like make the most of the time and celebrate and have fun. So the kind of preparation for grief happened more one-on-one with my mom, like in bed, curled up, like just her kind of sharing where she was at. And we had those moments, but very few and far between. And then when she was gone, I mean, I was close with my other family members, and so I was kind of put on the spot, which was after she had died, her wishes were, basically she just said, like, I had the choice. So I'm 13, my mom just died, and I'm now sitting in front of my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and my dad, choosing who I'm going to live with. And I think that could have been prepared for differently, even though I knew those were my options. I didn't realize that I was going to be sitting in front of them, making this decision out loud, you know? And we could have all just sat down individually or collectively together when my mom was alive and been asked how I felt, and they would have been prepared, because I think receiving the answers also, they needed to tend to themselves, and it was all just like happening in the moment, like within days of her death.
Yeah.
Because we all happened to be there together. So using that time of togetherness to make all these decisions. Yeah. And yeah, and so I chose to live with my aunt and uncle for a number of reasons, and it was great. And I feel really poorly for them because they got a teenager who was like starting a new school, whose mom just died, who's like going through puberty for the first time, who doesn't have any tools to deal with her emotions, who was really angry at God or whatever that was, and was a self-proclaimed atheist, and just all of these things. That they had this sweet niece as a child who became a teenager who was really angry because she didn't have any tools for grieving. And then I was constantly told that I need to go get help. I need to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and I hated that because I felt like something was wrong with me, but like everyone else had the same, you know, nobody else was like expressing. Yeah. And I totally see how it was from a place of love and care, and that they didn't have the tools themselves to be able to support me in those ways. Like not just my aunt and uncle, but just anyone, of like calling everybody in. And so in my family, everyone kind of had their own emotional experiences. And my grandma was probably the most emotional. And I remember the rest of the family kind of, what I would say is judging her. As like, it's so much to be around and she just can't stop crying, and it's like a little bit overwhelming for everybody else. And really, she was probably having the most authentic, vulnerable experience of all of us, and just got to really feel all of that. And because I kind of adopted judgments of it, I definitely didn't let myself go there. And so I thought the idea of maturity was to kind of just like pull it all together, and I didn't realize that my anger as a teenager was related to this really not ever having grieved. And so this kind of stuck with me for a long time, and until it got to my capacity of like not crying, of like being really protective, of wearing a lot of armor, of like being abrasive to others when I needed to, when they were getting too close, when they were gonna penetrate my protection. I just would create this persona that was like a badass bitch who wasn't gonna get messed around with. And it was like this whole identity that was protecting me, but it was also keeping me from intimacy. And so it wasn't until my early 20s, really, that I was realizing the impact that it had on my relationships and being close with people, and that my cup of suppressing those emotions was pretty full and was overflowing. And for someone who like never really cried, commercials on TV, I was just overflowing without any will. It was just bubbling over, and like anything and everything would make me cry. And it was so freeing and so confusing, and so something that I had resisted, that And I think just speaking about it now, it's the awareness of intimacy and how deeply we all want, and I wanted connection and intimacy and would have that and would push it away, and would have it and would push it away. And was calling in other people who were doing the same thing, because we were both afraid of like that radical full living. And so seeing that it was really my choice and my responsibility, I sought tools and trainings and practices and help and grief counselors and all of the things over the last 10 years that have really supported me in going through my own process, and then being able to support others in doing the same in whatever journeys they're on. And I often find that grief is the thing. I worked in addiction care with hundreds and hundreds of clients, and a lot of times we come back to like, oh, you had this loss that was really big for you that never got acknowledged, and like you just need to grieve that. And it's such a foreign concept. So when I think about death and how that informs life, for me, the language that kind of weaves the two together is the language of grief.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I mean, really powerful. And grief is it's like part of us. It's something that needs to be expressed. And it's interesting that it was like totally suppressed. And then 10 years later, it was like, as you started to open, just the overflowing waters came through. Wow.
And I think that it's also part of initiations, right? So I just got married, you're getting married soon. And there's a part of us that is dying.
Yeah.
In order to step into the new incarnation of union or motherhood or a new job or whatever it is, something that changes our life and initiates us into becoming the next kind of up-leveled version of ourselves, we have to grieve the parts of us that can no longer go there and can't really fit through that gateway or that threshold. And I think that's such a big part of what we skip in our culture, is really grieving the loss of what we're losing when we step into something new. We're such a celebratory, think positive, let's not go there culture, that oftentimes these parts of us that really need, and even in the sense of qualities that we don't want to have anymore, that we're like breaking habits, or that protection that I was talking about. It's like that part of me had to die in order for me to become open and vulnerable and connect in new ways. And I really believe that everyone, including like murderers and rapists, and everyone deserves dignity in their death. And so I translate that to all these parts of us as well deserve dignity. The parts of us that had the bad habit or the addict version or whatever it is that's dying so that we can become the next version of ourselves, they need dignity. And we're often, especially in a self-help world, I find we're often like wanting to get rid of that part of ourselves or like banish it. And I really believe that kind of honoring its presence and dignifying its passing and kind of having a little funeral type relationship with its, I'm no longer carrying this forward with me in my life, is a powerful act and can really kind of honor all these pieces of ourselves. And so that's another part that we don't often get to honor. And so as we enter these rites of passages in our life, becoming adult, we get to grieve these parts that can't come with us. And I think that that's really important. And that's a big part of rites of passage that we can reclaim. So when we talk about conscious dying, it's like conscious dying in the living stages will help us be with our death when it comes, or our loved one's death, in a much more grounded, rooted in experience, rooted in knowing, rooted in lifetime of understanding and welcoming this, rather than just an event that happens.
Totally. Yeah, I just had some emotions come up because I thought about like all of these big transitions, even like I'm moving homes this week, like that, like grieving the loss of what was, or when a new mom, like a mother is about to have a baby, like to grieve, to have a funeral before the baby's born. I'm just like grieving what? Maidenhood. And the same with the marriage of grieving I just thought, like, wow, to have a ritual, a space of like letting go and honoring what was and grieving that phase of everything that you've had up until that point. It's like, that's so overlooked. Yeah.
And I think that grief allows us to celebrate life more, that there are ends of a spectrum that work together. And if we're constantly pushing the spectrum of celebration, then we're only meeting a certain capacity of it, because what we allow when we grieve, it broadens that whole spectrum of experience that then allows more capacity to celebrate and more capacity to experience joy in different ways, because we've expanded ourselves to be able to feel more of that grief or loss in a way that stretches us to be able to experience more life. Therefore, when it is a time of joy and celebration, and that they can, what we just shared is like they happen at the same time often.
Yeah.
And so separating them and separating life and death and talking about all these things as if they're separate really is a detriment to living a full life where all of these things are part of it, rather than life is this growth-oriented, new beginnings, like expansion kind of idea, youthful, and it misses all these other parts of life.
Yeah. No, I'm so happy that you shared all of that, because it's definitely, like, as I'm about to prepare for so many big transitions, of just like to have that space to honor the letting go and the grief. So I also want to ask you about the funeral industry and just like some things that you learned and that people are probably not even aware of, and things that may have even surprised you, or just tell us about what some things that you learned about that.
Yeah, we can talk about all of this, and we will. And I really want to encourage everyone to find out the laws of their state or wherever they live, country, because it varies state to state what you're allowed and not to do. So I'm going to talk about things in a very general sense that I've come to know them as, and that there is specifics that might be changed when you look into your state's laws, because it varies. So to my knowledge, funerals were something that were always at home. Honoring the body, cleansing the body, preparing the body for burial or cremation was something that we always did together. And back when I'm talking about, it was burial. In Western culture, in the British colonized America, this is something that we had up until the Civil War, where and as I say that, I'm like, it could be the Revolutionary War, but it was the Civil War, where men were away from home and dying. And so it became a job for people to prepare the bodies to get them home so that they could be buried on their land or with their families. And that started to happen, and it was something that the families had to eventually pay for. And so it eventually became a status symbol of, oh, our family can afford for other people to take care of our dead. And so it became a competition of status in our culture to be able to give that to our loved ones when they died. But it really started in war, because men were dying away from home and needed their bodies to be prepared by somebody else. And so that became an industry. The word undertaker was like, I will undertake this responsibility for your family since your loved one is not there. And so it was this beautiful thing because it was necessary at that time, but then it became an industry that when there was no war, it was happening. And a lot of that was because of status. And so this idea of, if you're my sister and you die at home, this is before hospitals and prolonging people on machines and prolonging their life with intubation and all of these things that are beneficial in some ways when they're needed for accidents, and often when people are sick or older are often just playing God and keeping people alive for very little longer than their bodies naturally would like to be. And there are situations in which those what's the word I'm thinking of? Like innovations in technology are really valuable and have also taken us away from tending to our loved ones. And it has also taken people away from knowing themselves and knowing their bodies, and putting a lot of their own self-knowledge into somebody else's hands. And you can see in the death industry and birth, death and birth are ends of a spectrum of life. And that if we look at the birth industry and hospitals, we can see a lot of similarities as we can see in the death industry in dying. So we have kind of men in white coats and men in black coats supporting us, and really, I'm not blaming them. We've given our power away and chosen to not even know that we're dying, not even know that we're sick, not even know that there's something wrong, and deny it and be in denial that it's only when a doctor sits us down and tells us this that we can then start to understand that it might be true. And I think that that's amazing. So the funeral industry in and of itself is basically when someone dies in a hospital or in your home, most people don't have a lot of knowledge of what to do. And so the first thing they do is call someone to give them the answers. And that person usually calls, depending on the situation, will call someone to come claim the body and bring it to the funeral home, unless it needs an autopsy. And the only reason you would need an autopsy is if you had no prior indication of illness, or you died at home and you weren't under a doctor's care, so that a doctor couldn't say, oh yeah, I knew this person was sick with this and I signed the death certificate. So then they bring the body to autopsy, which is a whole other awful, grotesque thing that happens to the bodies. And they have to get a lot of these done in a day, and the way that they cut open these bodies. And so I, from a spiritual perspective, believe that the soul is attached to the physical body through these wheels called the chakras, which are kind of like a screw cap on a 2-liter bottle of Coke. They kind of screw on the light body, the energetic body, the spiritual body to the physical body, so that we're walking around together our whole lives. And when we die, those chakras get unwound and stop and allow the light body to be released and move on its journey, where the physical body stays here and just decomposes. And that's just my personal beliefs. And so when we have somebody taking the body and cutting it up or filling it with formaldehyde or all of these things that happen because of law, it can disrupt that process. And we can get stuck in cycles because that process of leaving and detaching from our bodies is interrupted. And so I've come to find that a 3-day period, and for other cultures there's a lot longer, but a 3-day period is a really nice period to have, minimal invasion of the body, except ritual bathing and washing and supporting the body in being loved and supported in that separation, in that journey, and when we have some stranger coming in and taking our loved one's body and bringing it somewhere where we're not going to see it, there's 2 things that happen. One is for the one dying, who that process can be interrupted. The other is for the ones left behind, who I believe, if we have tangible, somatic, cellular understanding of grief by having our hands on the loved one's body, our body is understanding grief rather than our minds. And so we can understand in our mentally, they were here, they're not here. But physically understanding that is a much more supportive process to allowing that information to be cellularly understood. And so a lot of times you have someone who you love and they're alive and then they die and then the body is taken away. And you're understanding that they died mentally, but without the hands-on experience of supporting the body, bathing the body, preparing the body for burial or cremation, or there's a million other options now. I feel like the loved ones who are left behind really miss that opportunity. And some people in their dying are like, I don't really care what happens, I'm dead, like, do whatever you want. And I think if we asked enough questions and this was a regular dialogue, that we might find some more understanding and choose things for ourselves that we're responsible for the planet, for our loved ones. And so what happens normally in many deaths, and I'm talking about in North America, in the US, Canada, is we call someone, they take the body, and if they were sick and someone just signs the death certificate, they just go straight to the funeral home. They don't need an autopsy. And the funeral home drains all the blood from their body. And that goes into our water system. So there's people on chemo and with illnesses, and all this gets drained into our public water system. And then the body is filled with chemicals, including formaldehyde. And that only...
This is specifically for if you're embalmed, right?
Correct, which the majority of people are embalmed. Because it's just part of the funeral package, and it's just what funeral homes do, and it's something that is so unnecessary that they charge you for, that I actually think makes the body look worse, not better, but they sell it to you as this is going to make your loved one look better. And if you have an open casket, and even if people don't have an open casket, this is still something that they do. It just kind of become protocol, and it's completely unnecessary. A dead body on ice will stay and look beautiful for a long time. And, you know, skin will sink, eyes will set in, gravity will happen, but to me, it's much more beautiful and natural looking and looks like your loved ones than somebody who's never met your loved one, maybe once if they were alive and they set it up beforehand, in working from a picture, trying to make them look the same. And and just the different things that happen. And so we could, you know, if someone has a cut or something, it's like you would treat it as if they were alive. You would use the same herbs and salves and ointments and bandage it up the way you would. And so we have other people, strangers, touching our loved ones' dead, naked bodies. And they're just doing their job. And I'm sure that there are people who do it with a lot of honor and deep appreciation for that position, to be in families' lives in that way. I know that they're out there. And my sense is that it's a job, and you're just doing your job, and there has to be a disconnect in order to get the job done. And so draining all the fluids in the body, and then filling the body with embalming fluids. And then if it's open casket or not, even if someone gets cremated, they still do this process oftentimes, which is strange to me. And so there are two reasons why when people are buried, their body never degrades. It basically becomes soup, even if you're up in the wall in a mausoleum. Bodies become soup because they're in cement vaults. And they say that the reason for the cement vaults is so that the illnesses and embalming fluids don't leach into the ground, into the water system, into things like that, even though we're like draining all the sicknesses and chemo and all the therapies into the water system. Anyway, they say it's because of this, but realistically it's because the funeral home's the cemetery's grass, if there wasn't a cement vault around the casket would eventually break down, and there would be little bumps, indentations in the cemetery, and it wouldn't look nice. And it's hard to upkeep. So we put ourselves in caskets, and then put the caskets inside a cement vault. And so the body never goes back to the earth. This death never becomes new life, which is what that's what death is. Death feeds life, not only in the information of learning from it the way that we're talking about it now, but when we have food that goes bad, it goes back into the earth and composts and becomes food for bugs who poop and create soil, and it's rich, fertile soil for new seeds to be planted. This is the cycle of life, death and life feeding each other. And we've taken that process of allowing our bodies to go back to the earth, away from the earth and away from nutrition and value and that cycle continuing and feeding new life. And so oftentimes this is what funerals happen. And even when you're cremated, what you get as the ashes isn't nutrient dense for soil. Like people sell like trees and plant a tree with your dead one's cremation, and it doesn't really, there's no nutrients in that because of the process of cremation. And so my biggest reason for reclaiming home funerals for the loved ones' bodies to be at home is that it's profoundly healing. Story and story and story and story after story of people who've done this, who have been afraid, don't want to touch a dead body, who have, just thought it was the weirdest, grossest thing ever, are converted immediately because it brings everyone together. It supports the grieving process. It honors the loved one. It takes all the power back, and it's dignifying in this way that when we have somebody else do it, we're missing out on all of this. Even if we have the beautiful whatever ceremonies different religions have done, we can still honor all of those ceremonies and rituals and prepare the body ourselves. And so the way to do this, if you were at home and your loved one was dying or you were dying, is being on hospice is the easiest way. Being at home and having hospice come in is the easiest way to have the body stay at home, where you tell your hospice team, this is something that we're doing. There's a doctor who's been treating the person. They know that they're sick. The hospice worker will have the doctor fax over and sign the death certificate, and the body can stay at home. And so if you're in a hospital, there's a process which legally a dead body becomes property of next of kin. So if you're my mother and I'm next of kin and you die, your body becomes my property. I can do whatever I want with it and keep it on ice. I can bury it in my backyard. In some states, there are all these things that are traditional things that we've done that we are allowed to do that people don't even know that we're allowed to do. And one of the reasons I think this is important, especially for the other way around, when a child dies before a parent, I think that these rituals are really important because it seems mentally like it's not the process of cycle of life that it's supposed to happen that way, but it happens all the time. Kids have been dying since the beginning of time. And so, but I think having your child and holding your child, even their dead body, is profoundly healing than having some stranger take it away. And most mothers who have had that happen to, like, intuitively know, like, I want to keep it, but they have no education. They have no understanding of what has to happen legally and different things. And so being as well informed as we can. And so if someone's not on hospice, what happens is that even though I'm next of kin and I can take the body, I need special permits and things that would allow me to take the body in my car to be able to bring it to my home. And these permits usually take about 3 days. And so the hospital just puts you in a freezer until the funeral home or someone with a funeral home license can come get the body. So if I wanted to have a home funeral, what I would want to do is work with funeral homes in my town to find out who would be willing to allow us to have a home funeral, to take the body from the hospital or wherever it is and bring it to our house and not embalm and just let us do our thing. And this is rare. Mm-hmm. Most funeral homes, it's like their license on the line. What are you going to do with the body at home? This is not something that we talk about often, but it's happening more and more and more. And so it's taking money away from them. And there are also people who are like, great, this is less work for me. Like, great, you do that. And then you pay me for the transportation and the burial fees or the cremation fees. And I'll do all of that stuff. And you do the funeral part. And you wash the body and you take care of it. But it's rare. And you have to really do a lot of work before people are sick and dying if you want to make that happen. And there are also funeral homes like Sacred Crossings in LA. And there's one in Sebastopol here that support, that have all the permits to help people do that and are not a part of that industry. They're part of the reclaiming. So the more you can do, the more conversations we can have, the more research we can do, the more paperwork we can have prepared, the more decisions we can make about our own death while we're alive, the better.
Yeah.
And that means being okay talking about this thing that nobody wants to talk about, but everyone secretly does want to talk about, because as soon as you talk about it, everyone's like, oh, finally, permission. Like, oh, my dad died 6 months ago and I haven't had anyone to really talk to about this. And I'm so glad that you're, this friend of a friend who we happen to have dinner together and you're talking about death. And now all of a sudden I have all this freedom to talk about things that I've been wanting to talk about from my dad's death. And it's like so freeing for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell us about all the documents, like the things that you started to put together just for yourself. What we can think about putting together.
I wish I had it in front of me, because there's like a bullet pointed list and I can just give it to you and you can share it if there's show notes.
In the blog post, yeah.
It's great to have like a file, and I'm starting mine digitally as well as paper format, because I just think that that's the future, and have a Dropbox where my 3 advocates, the people who are going to make decisions for me or next in line to make decisions for me if I'm incapacitated, can just have access to this Dropbox folder with all the files. And so there's a pulsed, which is basically a different color in every state. And this is your do not resuscitate, do not intubate, resuscitate, like all the things that you want in a medical emergency. And there's different categories of like, if I'm this age and healthy and well, or this age and not healthy, or if I'm at this level of sickness, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? And so that's for each person to decide for themselves what they want. I have very specific like appendages and things typed out that I've like added to these documents, and you just have to fill them out and have a witness sign them. That doesn't need to be notarized. And so like some people are so obsessed with this that they want to put it in their passenger seat in their car. What if I get into a car accident and someone is doing all these things to my body that I don't want to have happen? And it's very rare that in an emergency setting that would ever be looked at or found. And most people are going to be in an emergency setting, everything possible to make them live and survive will be done. That a hospital or emergency or EMT. I was thinking of EFT because we talk about EFT a bunch. Or a hospital does. It's their job to keep people alive, which in some cases is great. And in many cases is just expensive and unnecessary and playing God and creating a lot more trauma for families and people dying who are weak and their bodies are weak, and we're doing all of this stuff to them. And there are people who are listening who very much disagree because it saved someone's life that they know, and I totally support that. And as an industry in and of itself, the medical hospital industry, it's amazing what we will make families go through to try to save someone in their family's life, to just eventually have to get to be the place of like, just let them die. It's, and because none of these things were working, especially kids. And I can't imagine being a sick person and having all of these things done to try to save my life when my body is just like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to die. And being confronted with that, I'm sure is really challenging, and I haven't been there. So there's death. I'm missing all the language, but there's basically death wishes that are happening as you're dying. You need to have advocates, people who will be able to make those decisions for you. And there's 3 people who you want to have at least 2 in case one of them is dead or out of the country or can't make those decisions. And that they all know where your death file with all the paperwork and all the things are. There's a living will. There's planning out your, having money in a special account for your funeral services, whatever you want to happen to your body. It does cost money, especially if you want to have a green, beautiful funeral. It's amazing that that's like the eco version of it is quite expensive. And there's so many options. You can go out to sea. There's so many things that happen. There are mushroom suits. So I think doing as much research as what you want, and you deciding for yourself how you want to go, and checking this file, every 3 years, and just seeing, do I still feel this way? Do I still want this? After this has happened in my life and this has happened, would I choose the same things? And revisiting it. Insurance. And then there's after death care. So there's death care directive, your death care directive, which is pretty common. You can just go online and get them printed. And then there's your after death, which is usually not something that people fill out, but because I was in this course, was a big part of this teacher's particular being responsible for, and so it talks about a home funeral and different things. And so you can spend time with it and answer questions and fill it out and decide what you want. And it's a process, it can be a confronting process. It can be something that we don't really want to think about. But I find everyone who gives themselves the time and space to think about it feels so good, feels unburdened, feels lighter, feels responsible. It's just taken care of and it's done, and it can just be put somewhere where the right people are going to be able to access it when you need it. And to be okay with, your wishes might not happen, and a lot of stuff might happen to your dead body that you would have not preferred, or your sick, dying body that you would have not preferred. That is just, even if I have wishes, and my partner is one of my advocates, my top one. If I'm dying and I'm like, do not resuscitate, even if that is notarized, if he's the advocate and I can't speak for myself, he can choose whatever he wants. He can be like, no, I want her to live, put all the tubes, put her on all the machines, do it. He's on the list because I trust that he will not do that. Mm-hmm. But even if it's notarized, my wishes are notarized, the person who is speaking for me, if I'm unable to speak for myself, is the one who gets to make all those decisions. And if they're not there, the hospital just tries to keep you alive, and then your body goes through the process that everybody else's body in the system without loved ones goes through. Mm. And so, there's so many things that our culture can reclaim to support people who don't have anyone who's dying, to sit with the dying who don't have loved ones at nursing homes and veteran places and hospice centers that are not at home. There's so many ways in which we can come together and support each other. And not just our own loved ones, but as a culture and as a community, and really expand that responsibility in learning about these things within our communities. And so I find that there's a thing called death cafes if you just look it up, there's likely one near any major city or town. And it's just a place where people can come and get educated and talk about these things and share. And I'd love to do more paperwork parties where people can see, oh, these are all the things that I could have, and now I'm understanding them, and someone's explaining them to me. And I can take them home and sit with them, and I can put them in order, and I can take my time doing it, rather than just a living will or one or two of these paperworks. It's really knowing the expanse. And so there's so much more that I'm not naming, all your passwords for all your online many things that will have to be canceled, and someone will have to take care of that. That's burdensome unless you have it all spelled out for them really well, and it's here's everything you can possibly need. So there's so much that we could be responsible for in our life to prepare for death, so that others are not taking on those things, and that we're just being responsible for our life, being responsible for our bodies, being responsible for all the things that we've taken on in our life.
Yes. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. So much information that we can use. There were a couple more things I wanted to touch on. One was just if you want to share a little bit about your own desires, or in an ideal, what would you do?
I think about those often. So in an ideal, I would be old and just dying of, oldness. Mm-hmm. There could be some level of sickness or illness, but even if I was ill, I would like to be so intimate with myself that I know I'm dying, and I can come into acceptance of that over time and have a process of dying that I can be intimate with life and myself in this dying, in this confrontation of shedding identity, of grieving while I'm alive, all the identities of being alive and being in this particular body that I could, and having time to be with myself to do that. One of the things that I've done in many classes, I've studied with the Zen Hospice Center and lots of other places, a thing is like, if you were to get news that you were dying in 2 months or 2 years or 2 weeks, what would you do? And so I like to ask myself this because I often say I would be in my garden. And I don't even have a garden, and that's a sign that says, like, I would love to just be outside with flowers, planting things in the garden with friends coming over and like bringing tea and just talking. And like, so why do I not do more of that in my life? And I think that's a great question that can inform us what's important. And I don't think I would travel the world. And in my life, I spend a lot of time traveling. But I think if I was dying, I would just be where I am. And people would come. I would love for people to come. Come, everybody come. And just be still and be outside and be in the garden and play with bees and, have, if I'm older, have kids and grandkids visit and loved ones. And I would really like, ideally, to have a living funeral instead of an after-death funeral, and have everyone come while I'm alive and have a party and a celebration and to talk about their experiences of me in their life, and flowers everywhere, and for me to just receive. And I would probably be weak and probably be a few weeks before I die. And that I would be so intimate with myself that I would know relatively how much time I had, and I would be giving my things away. I would be getting rid of stuff. I would be seeing what's special and not special and letting go of it, and telling people stories about this thing that's so special that I want to gift them, and not just dying and having all of that stuff be left and people don't even know why I kept it and why it's important to me, and then it's not important to them because they don't know the story. And just giving my things away and getting lighter as I have my conscious death journey. And I would, one of the things that I wrote down in what would I do if I had a diagnosis of a short time, I wrote that I would spend time becoming radically intimate partnership with God. Like, I would just dissolve all of my ego and identities to like be in radical union and like spiritual partnership in a way that I totally feel like is my life path and devotion and what I'm doing always. But I find that without the necessity to be productive and bring home a paycheck and feed myself, because if I'm dying, I can't do any of those things, that I would just have so much time. And that's how I would want to spend it. And death would be such an invitation into that. And so I would want a living funeral. I would want to have saved a lot of money for my family to bury my body at a green burial site, which means like no nails in the coffin, like very particular, being in, the organic cotton or silk or linen shrouds. And I definitely want to be in a shroud. I definitely want to be buried in the earth. That's what I want. Since learning a lot of things through different courses, I've taken being an organ donor off my license because of what happens to the body. I've watched a number of documentaries and had like the head of the organ donation in America come talk to a class of mine, and I was like, oh wow, this seems like such the right thing to do thing, and it's not what I want to happen to my physical body and my energetic body that's attached to my body at death. And what they do, what I've learned that they do, and so it's something that I've chosen to keep for myself and just go back to the earth and I hope that I will live long and things will be different by the time I get there, and I'll have different options. But right now, the options for a really sustainable death are pretty expensive. And what I've found is that people who have a living funeral don't need as much time for the home funeral. So whatever my family needs for them. I would love for my body to be bathed ritually, to have all the frankincense, massaged on my body to keep my body soft and honored and embalmed in a different way. That would allow me, if I was going to be alive and viewed by others in my death, they could have a home funeral, and I and my family to be really educated, and all the people in my life to know, to have been having these conversations, to know. And I think I have a lot of time, and I have a death file prepared, but if it happens tomorrow, but if it is in the future, I hope that our options and our culture and the funeral movement, the home funeral movement, changes in ways that make it a lot easier, that cemeteries and things make it a lot cheaper to have bodies just go into the ground because of the way that we're living. And I understand, because of the way many people live and the way many people die, we don't want all of those chemicals and foods and prescriptions and chemo in the ground based on what we're choosing in our life. And I think all of this is leadership. All of this is being a leader and taking responsibility for our bodies, for our life, for the impact that all of our choices has on our environment and our loved ones. And so being as well educated on death as possible. So I hope that I'm old and I have kids and grandkids and people who know that I'm passionate about this, that they are so inspired to make what is going to nourish them and help them grieve my not being there anymore. And that honors my body and a graceful transition of my light body separating, or my soul separating from my physical body, and my physical body being really dignified and loved. And I want lots of flowers on me, around me. I just want, lots of flowers. And at a living funeral, just like lots of flowers. And yeah, that's what I'd like. And we'll see when we get there. And it can happen tomorrow in a way that's spontaneous, and none of that stuff happens, and I'm put on all these machines, and it's all okay. I think death is about teaching us detachment, and so it's all okay.
Yeah. I really felt the sweetness of your desires and intentions in that, and the thought and the care and the beauty of that honoring life and this body and your relationship to your body and how you want that to continue after. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared today. I think this is really needed learning in our culture, and I'm so grateful that now it's recorded and I can send it to all my family and people that I love to start thinking about and start the conversations around this.
I'm actually, just on that note, eventually I want to put together beautiful death files with all the paperwork that one would need in a beautiful folder, and give them to people that I love as gifts, and just be like, Merry Christmas, here's your death file, fill it out.
Wow.
I'm happy to sit with you and do it and have conversations. But yeah, getting all of that stuff for them, because it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And just having it all prepared, and even having it online for people to just buy, and it's all done. And
oh my God, that would be really wonderful.
Or digital download,
Yes,
just here's everything. There. Do it, sign it, take time with it. I think that that's just a great act of responsibility for us to take, but also for us to share and give when we are aware of the responsibility to give that gift of supporting others and being responsible for themselves. And so whatever that gift, Happy Mother's Day, here's your death file.
Yeah, thank you. And so anything that you want to share with the people listening, just on what you are doing in your life right now, things you're excited about, how people can stay in touch with you.
Yeah. Just on this note of what we're talking about, have as many conversations with the people you love while they're living. Mm-hmm. And so part of my the evolution of my work is to have these conversations. And I think that that is going to be a bit more like locationally and small town based where I land soon. And if that expands to a more public forum, Spirit will guide that process. So I don't know what that looks like, except I don't know what this particular work looks like manifested in my life. And I'm not efforting to create anything except just listening for Spirit. If a hospice center, a conscious dying center wants to come, or education around living and dying, that will just be really apparent when the time comes. And for now, I'm receiving guidance to just stay on this path of sharing and education and supporting people in leadership in their lives. And that really looks like embodying a deeper path of devotion. And so that's what I do, and that's what I offer. And I offer a lot of full spectrum living content on my social media, on Facebook, live videos twice a week, and you can check out my website, lunaloveleadership.com. I'm on Instagram and all social media is Luna Love Leadership if you're interested in these conversations. And even though if it's not about death, this idea of full spectrum living includes death. And so it's really the grieving, the dying, all the things that we don't want to talk about, that we're ready as a culture to reclaim and ready as individuals to welcome into the wholeness of our being. So that's what I'm really excited about, is full spectrum living and supporting people in knowing that their choices, their leadership is what will allow them to have that whole, radical, full, rich, full spectrum life of experiencing amazing intimacy in every moment, and the profundity of life just being a regular thing that kind of hits us in the face, and we're just like dissolve into the wonder of it. And that's what I would love everyone to live as. And so that's what I do, is support people in deepening in that path of living wholly and fully in that full spectrum. So yeah.
Thank you. Any closing words before I just say a prayer to end our time together?
No, I feel complete, and I just want to thank you so much for the space that you hold and create, and in your work and the beautiful work that you do, and inviting me to be a part of it in this way and return to the show. It's such an honor. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Luna. So let's just breathe this in for a moment. Just feel our hearts feeling how it is, what it is in our bodies to be alive in this moment. Taking a breath in and letting it out. Opening ourselves to the knowing that one day we will pass. And when we are willing to look at those places and to really ask these deeper questions, that we can have so many empowered choices about how we live today and how we show up for ourselves and for others, and can make an impact in the time that we do have. So just bringing my hands to my heart and bowing to Luna. Thank you for all of this amazing wisdom that is so needed. Thank you. And to everyone listening, for your curiosity and your willingness to do your own work and to show up for yourself and to live in good relations with yourself, with Spirit, with everything around you. So I bow. Namaste. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.